Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, honorable guests, dear friends. I warmly welcome you today to our high-level event, EU-Africa and the Farm to Fork Strategy, with excellent speakers, guests, and friends. Today we are talking about Africa and the importance of the partnership for Europe and for Africa as well. Africa is strong and has great potential. The European Commission has recently recognized this and proposed in March 2020 the basis for a new strategy with Africa. The EU wants to work with Africa in 5 key areas: green transition, digital change, sustainable growth and jobs, peace and governance, migration and mobility. The partnership should be based on a clear understanding of our own and mutual interests and responsibilities. Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen said on this context, with the proposed 5 partnerships based on our common interests and values, Africa and Europe will jointly take the lead in environmental and digital change and promote sustainable investment and jobs. My first priority now is to ensure that the strategy with Africa is supported by the young people and women whose expectations it is designed to meet. In 2011, Hillary Clinton also stressed, if all African women from the Cape to Cairo decided not to work, the entire economy of the continent would collapse like a house of cards. Yes, it is true. Women in particular are the true pearls of Africa and contribute to the preservation of rural areas with their work. They ensure the survival of their families and manage house, farm, field, and children. After all, the production, processing, and distribution of agricultural food is one of the most important sources of jobs and prospects for the local people. So what does the EU want to achieve with its strategy for Africa and the Farm to Fork strategy? Where do we stand with these ambitious strategies? The European Union wants to promote the global transition to sustainable agriculture and food systems in line with the SDG objectives. In this context, agricultural and trade policies play an important role. Food security and the zero hunger objective are more important than ever, especially during the COVID-19 crisis. So the production of agricultural and food worldwide must be the top priority. In Africa, small local farms must be helped to produce and supply sufficient food and access to markets. The resilience of food systems must be strengthened and food waste reduced. More investment in food research and innovation is urgently needed to reform global food systems. We also need fair value chains and regional and local supply chains. Nutritious food and healthy diets, as well as prevention of food crises, are more important today than ever. At this point, I would like to stress the important role of the United Nations, FAO, and World Food Programs, which have demonstrated their important work, especially in unstable situations. Congratulations to the World Food Programme on winning the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to combat hunger worldwide. One is clear. Global change requires integrated, targeted solutions that are tangible and effective, especially for people on the ground. Our questions are today, how do we want to implement this together in the line with UN stability goals? What do the new Africa strategy and the Farm to Fork strategy mean in detail for Africa and Europe? What do Africa and Europe have to do in order to promote sustainable and food systems within the framework of their international cooperation and in bilateral, regional, and multilateral forums? I'm sure that today's event will provide us with some important answers to these questions. I am therefore very much looking forward to today's discussion and warmly welcome our distinguished speakers. I would like to thank SME Europe and Hans Seidel Foundation for their excellent support of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mortler. I'm honored to be the moderator of today's discussion. So, as already mentioned before, the program is filled with many high-level politicians from Europe and from Africa. We have very knowledgeable and experienced experts and representatives from the EU as well as from the United Nations. The variety of speakers allows us to shed some light on the conference's topic. So we can really see different perspectives. So that is the great strength, I think, of this conference. Without much further ado, I would like to pass the floor to the first guest of honor, Dr. Maria Flachsbart, Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development of Germany. Dr. Flachsbart.
Thank you very much, Annes Schley. Dear Marlene Mortler, honorable participants, Angelique Ngoma, Leonard Misi, and Stephanie Galatova, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to MEP Mortler for inviting me to this important event. We are all aware that we have only 10 more years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for humanity. This is very little time to master the enormous challenges we are facing with. I would therefore like to start by highlighting 3 aspects that I consider particularly important. First of all, we need to chart a new course in our EU-Africa policy. Africa is the continent of the future. At the same time, our African neighbors are facing great challenges, and the Agenda 2063 of the African Union and the 2030 Agenda have defined joint targets for mastering these challenges, because only by working together we will be able to end hunger and poverty, to ensure peace and security, to stop climate change and biodiversity loss, to strengthen trade and fair supply chains. We therefore welcome the EU-Africa strategy and the approach of pursuing a strategy together with Africa rather than a strategy for Africa. In its development policy, Germany is supporting this realignment through comprehensive, innovative initiatives. One example is the BMZ's special One World No Hunger initiative, which brings me to my second point. A world without hunger is possible. You are all familiar with the facts and figures. Worldwide, enough food is produced to feed us all. Yet almost 690 million people suffered from hunger in 2019. Africa is particularly affected. In Eastern Africa alone, 1 in 3 people are undernourished. With a growing world population, climate change, dwindling natural resources, and increasing demand for them, the situation will only get worse. And we are already concerned today that this year alone, an additional up to 130 million people could slip back into hunger and poverty as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And 6.7 million children under the age of 5 could additionally be affected by acute malnutrition. These figures are alarming. Hunger is a humanitarian tragedy. Hunger is avoidable. And so our message is a world without hunger is possible. Business as usual is not an option. We thus need structural change in the way we produce, market, and consume food. And this means we need ambitious food systems that provide us with healthy food in sufficient quantities and qualities, protect our resources and respect planetary boundaries. Recover forward is our guiding principle. And that brings me to my third point, the role of the EU. The Green Deal of the European Commission is a new guiding vision for sustainable development that can take us into the future. That is why we are supporting the EU's Farm to Fork strategy. And the Council conclusions on the strategy adopted on 19th October also send out the right signal. In order to achieve the SDGs, this also means that we must think more about the impact of our agriculture policy on developing countries and emerging economies. Europe's agriculture policy must be aligned with the sustainability requirements of the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy, because the agricultural sector is extremely important for achieving the SDGs. It provides jobs and livelihoods, especially with a special focus on women, as Marlene Mortler has mentioned, and especially particularly, of course, for rural areas. Smallholder families are its key pillar. So special consideration must be given to their interests and concerns. In our view, possible solutions should, among other things, build on using the potential of agricultural trade for boosting value creation in Africa, supporting partner countries in complying with the EU product standards, concluding fair EU trade agreements with open market access. And our African partners too need to make agricultural policy more of a priority. In addition, we, Europe and Africa, must use the potential of agricultural trade to promote Africa's regional integration. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the AfCFTA, is thus also an African vision for development and prosperity, for greater resilience to crisis. Nobody must be left behind. Moreover, it is high time that we make our European laws coherent with the SDGs. There are no excuses. When it comes to climate change, agriculture is both a victim and a perpetrator. But Africa's agriculture is primarily victim. That is why we in Europe need to change things. European laws must pay heed to the effects they have on the agricultural sector beyond the EU. High standards for climate and resource protection can create the right incentives for European farmers. I hope that the European Parliament will send out a strong and clear signal for a sustainable, forward-looking common agricultural policy. In combination with a fair agricultural trade policy, it can help us build an agricultural model that is part of the solution and not part of the problem. So What are the next steps that need to be taken? We should use the 2021 EU-AU summit to place agriculture and food security at the center of European and African policies. We should lobby for that at the UN Food System Summit next year, for example. Ladies and gentlemen, let us turn European agriculture policy into a forward-looking, sustainable agriculture policy. Let us act now for ending poverty and hunger, for a global Green Deal, for an ambitious EU-Africa partnership. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maria Flaxbart. I think you made very clear that today's topic is embedded in so many different policies, both internal, external. You touched upon trade, agriculture, development, cooperation. There's so many more. So I think that is very important to keep in mind. And also I would like to refer to what you mentioned, that we should not speak about each other when we speak about EU-Africa relations, but with each other, which brings us to the next guest of honor. Angélique Ngoma is a member of the Parliament of Gabon, and she's also the president of the Cooperation and Development Committee of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Francophonie. So we are very happy to have you, because I think there are still too many panels in Brussels where it's about EU-Africa relations, and then there's nobody actually from Africa. So we are very happy to have you with us, and then of course also the other speakers from the African continent. To the audience, just a reminder, Madame Ngoma will speak in French. So if you prefer to listen to her in English, please press the button on the top for the interpretation. Madame Ngoma.
Merci. Je voudrais aussi saluer toutes les intervenantes à ce forum d'importance. Mon thème va porter sur les principales priorités de l'Afrique francophone. Sont-elles reflétées dans la nouvelle stratégie Union européenne-Afrique proposée et quels sont les éléments manquants? Mesdames, Messieurs, je suis heureuse de prendre part à cette visioconférence sur la stratégie Afrique-Union européenne. Je remercie chaleureusement les organisateurs de cette rencontre d'avoir voulu, à travers ma personne, associer l'Assemblée parlementaire de la francophonie à cette réflexion importante pour les peuples d'Afrique et d'Europe. Comme vous le savez, l'Union européenne a publié une communication en mars dernier en prévision du sommet Union africaine-Union européenne. Ce document contenait bien évidemment des propositions concernant 5 domaines prioritaires: la transition verte et l'accès à l'énergie, la transformation numérique, la croissance durable et l'emploi, la paix et la gouvernance, la migration et la mobilité. Malgré cela, les priorités énoncées ne reflètent pas suffisamment les ambitions africaines. En effet, certaines questions cruciales telles que la pauvreté, la santé, les infrastructures de transport et l'accès à Internet ne sont pas prises en compte de manière adéquate. Les priorités de l'agenda 2063 de l'Union africaine ne sont que partiellement couvertes. Ces omissions sont attribuées en grande partie au recours inadéquat à une approche holistique centrée sur les personnes pour décider des domaines d'intervention. Notamment, la communication n'aborde le développement humain que sous l'angle réducteur de la création d'emplois, comme la question de la résilience, qui est examinée principalement du point de vue de l'État, n'évoquant la résilience des citoyens et des communautés que de manière limitée. Mesdames, Messieurs, la COVID-19 présente l'occasion d'accroître le soutien de l'Union européenne au système de santé africain. Les interlocuteurs du continent africain doivent veiller à ce que les priorités du continent évoquées ci-dessous soient bien prises en compte. Au nombre des priorités négligées, l'éradication de la pauvreté constitue une préoccupation majeure. Plus de 70% des personnes les plus pauvres du monde vivent sur le continent et la lutte contre la pauvreté, les inégalités et la faim est essentielle à l'agenda 2063. Le premier rapport sur la mise en œuvre de l'agenda 2063, publié en février 2020, précise que l'Afrique a fait de modestes progrès en réalisant 36% de son objectif de réduction de la pauvreté, des inégalités et de la faim pour l'année 2019. Ces progrès risquent bien évidemment d'être compromis par l'impact de la COVID-19. Une nouvelle étude prévisionnelle montre que les effets les plus graves de la pandémie sur l'Afrique se manifesteront par une augmentation des niveaux d'extrême pauvreté. Mesdames et messieurs, bien que la transformation numérique soit une priorité proposée par l'Union européenne, l'accès à Internet n'est pas suffisamment pris en compte. De même, la santé est abordée dans la proposition de l'Union européenne comme un secteur subsidiaire à d'autres éléments et non comme un enjeu en soi. L'agenda 2063 met pourtant l'accent sur la nécessité d'avoir des citoyens en bonne santé et bien nourris. Bien que l'Afrique ait atteint 43% de son objectif de 2019 en matière de santé, elle a encore un long chemin à parcourir pour réduire l'incidence du paludisme. Seuls 27% de ces objectifs ont été atteints en ce qui concerne la lutte contre cette maladie. Selon l'OMS, les États africains consacrent également l'équivalent de 5 fois leur budget de santé au remboursement de leurs dettes. La pandémie de la COVID-19 offre donc l'occasion de redéfinir les priorités et d'accroître le soutien de l'Union européenne au système de santé africain. Les infrastructures de transport en particulier, les routes et les chemins de fer sont essentielles à une croissance durable et inclusive, y compris la mise en œuvre de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, la ZLECAf. L'Afrique dépend fortement de ces routes, qui représentent 80 à 90% de sa couverture de transport pour le transport des marchandises et des voyageurs. Mesdames, Messieurs, l'allègement de la dette en réponse à l'impact de la COVID-19 sera un test décisif pour ce partenariat. La transformation numérique est également un facteur de croissance durable et inclusive. La proportion des personnes en Afrique ayant accès à Internet a augmenté, passant de 21,8% en 2013 à 41,9% en 2019. Cela a permis au continent d'atteindre 56% de son objectif de 2019 concernant l'atteinte d'un niveau de vie élevé. Cependant, le continent se classe toujours derrière toutes les autres régions du monde en termes d'accès au web. Bien que la transformation numérique soit l'une des priorités proposées par l'Union européenne, l'accès à Internet n'est pas suffisamment pris en compte. Selon la Banque mondiale, l'Afrique doit investir 100 milliards de dollars pour parvenir à un accès à Internet abordable et de bonne qualité d'ici 2030. L'Union européenne souligne la nécessité de mettre en place des cadres réglementaires solides dans le secteur du numérique. Or, si la réglementation est importante pour la cybersécurité en Afrique, elle doit être abordée en parallèle avec l'enjeu de la fourniture d'un accès suffisant. Les conclusions du Conseil de l'Union européenne sur le partenariat Union européenne-Afrique, publiées en juin, ont souligné la nécessité de prendre en compte l'impact de la COVID-19 et l'allègement de la dette dans la prochaine stratégie Afrique-Union européenne. C'est un pas dans la bonne direction. L'allègement de la dette, comme réponse immédiate à l'impact à court terme de la pandémie, sera un test décisif pour le partenariat. La crise due à la COVID-19 provoque déjà la première récession de plus de 25 ans en Afrique subsaharienne et la dette extérieure totale du continent est estimée à 417 milliards de dollars. Les négociations sur la stratégie Afrique-Union européenne interviennent à un moment où l'UA prend des mesures concernant plusieurs initiatives importantes. Des préparatifs sont en cours pour le lancement de la ZLECAf, une stratégie où une énergie nouvelle est consacrée à l'initiative, à savoir, je cite, « faire taire les armes ». Et des réformes de l'UA visent à faire des communautés économiques régionales les premiers intervenants dans la gestion des crises locales. Mesdames, Messieurs, je voudrais encore ici insister sur l'importance de la femme dans le cadre de l'autonomisation de la femme, où il est bon d'asseoir des stratégies idoines pour qu'effectivement la femme qui joue un rôle important dans le cadre du développement de nos pays puisse avoir sa place dans le secteur économique. Mesdames, Messieurs, pour clore mon propos, je note qu'en tirant parti de ces évolutions, les négociateurs africains devraient bien évidemment viser une stratégie intercontinentale plus globale en travaillant en étroite collaboration avec l'Union africaine, les communautés économiques régionales et les États membres. C'est l'occasion non seulement de redéfinir le partenariat Afrique-Union européenne, mais aussi de le faire sur un pied d'égalité. Il me plaît donc de recommander la création des mécanismes pour allier l'économie libérale selon l'Organisation mondiale du commerce et les partenariats Afrique-Europe aux politiques altermondialistes adaptées aux économies africaines, étant donné que l'objectif étant d'éviter les antagonismes et permettre la mise en œuvre d'une souveraineté alimentaire dans les pays en voie de développement. Et je voudrais dire que mon pays, le Gabon, bien évidemment, a mis en place une politique nationale de sécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle qui a été validée en 2017. Elle a été conçue, il faut le dire, avec le soutien des organisations du système des Nations Unies, dont la FAO, et cette politique est aussi la réponse du Gabon à l'objectif de développement durable numéro 2. Donc, c'est encore avec plaisir que je me suis livrée à cette présentation en espérant que les propos développés sont considérés comme une avancée dans le cadre des échanges Afrique et Union européenne. Encore merci pour cette opportunité donnée à l'Assemblée parlementaire de la francophonie, notamment à la Commission coopération et développement que je préside. Bravo à toutes les intervenantes qui l'ont déjà fait et à celles à venir et à ceux à venir aussi. Merci à vous et encore bravo. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Ngoma. I think it's very important to keep this exchange to make sure that the EU-Africa strategy is really fit to meet all the needs and all the reality on the African continent. So thanks a lot for sharing. Thank you very much to Ms. Ngoma. So I think it's important to keep the exchange and not talk about each other, but with each other to make sure that the EU-Africa strategy really responds to the actual needs of the African continent and not only, to not only see it from the European perspective. So thanks a lot for adding your insights there. Our next speaker represents the European Commission. Leonard Mizzi is the head of unit for rural development, food security and nutrition at DG DEFCO. He has actually to leave us a little bit earlier before the Q&A session, which is why I would like to ask the audience to send us already their questions to him during his speech so that we can ask him directly after his contribution. Thank you very much. Mr. Mizzi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thanks to Ms. Mortler, and thank you as well to Ms. Flachbart and Dr. Ngoma. I think today's event is well timed, and I also thank SME office because it comes close to the Council conclusions of the Farm to Fork, which were unveiled in October. It comes close also a few weeks after the European Council conclusions, which also referenced the relations between EU and Africa, and also World Food Day, where there was also reference to the to the Nobel Prize, which was given to the World Food Programme. A clear recognition of the importance of food security, also in humanitarian development conditions. I think what the previous speakers referenced is clearly we have a lot of hooks, we have a lot of opportunities to take stock of what the situation is, not only of COVID. I don't need to repeat the major implications of COVID, including on vulnerable agri-food systems. The figure mentioned by Dr. Flachbart is clearly a figure of major concern. Just to recall, a year ago, December 2019, in terms of acute food hungry people across the globe, we were around 135 million. This figure can easily double, and the figures show that we are in the region probably well above 200 million World Food Programme is speaking about 250 to 160 million in acute food crisis. These are countries like the Yemens, like South Sudan's, like the RDCs. So clearly COVID has created extra pressure on an already vulnerable and fragile food system. Just to recall, I don't want to repeat what we have said as European Commission services in the context of Team Europe. The European Union, with the member states, with the financial institutions, including the European Investment Bank, mobilized over 36 billion as a response to COVID, of which around 5 billion were destined to sub-Saharan Africa. So the first thrust is clearly to respond to the health crisis, to public health systems, including to nutrition, but also to the socio-economic fabric of the continent. And I think as we are heading towards the new programming period, as the participants know, we are exiting the current multi-financial framework 2014-2020, and we are now entering the new programming period 2021-2027. This has to be factored into the equation. We are in discussions within the Commission services, but also with the member states in the coming weeks to look into the Team Europe proposals and see and gauge what are the priorities, first of all, at country level. So the case of Gabon, what does Gabon want to prioritize? What does RDC want to prioritize? What does Côte d'Ivoire, Kenya, and the others want to prioritize? And clearly, there is a clear evidence that the EU Green Deal and the Farm to Fork and the elements of sustainable agri-food systems is systematically being positioned as amongst the top priorities. We come from a period where around 60 countries, most in Africa, in the past MFF prioritize agriculture food systems. Evidently, the forecasts clearly show that sustainable agri-food systems will also be prioritized in most of these countries. However, evidently, we can't do or continue to do necessarily what we have been doing in the past 5, 10, 15 years. Today's world is much more complex. COVID has exposed certain shortcomings, and as European Union, with the member states, we need to think out of the box, think innovatively, because today's world is totally different from the world of 2013 or maybe 10 years ago. So first of all, multilateralism was mentioned. What happened in the US in the past days has given a positive signaling. We'll see evidently in terms of US politics what will come out from this impasse, but evidently the first signals of a new administration is a positive signal to multilateralism. I think the complexity of COVID, the complexity around agri-food systems shows that we need a strong multilateral system at WTO, but also within the Rome-based agencies. And I thank Rodrigo, who will speak after me, because we are trying between the Commission services and the FAO to mobilize also the parliamentarians under our Parliamentary Assembly against hunger, to also look into sustainable agri-food systems from an inter-institutional perspective. As we are heading to the UN Food System Summit in a year's time, as we are heading towards the Nutrition for Growth Summit again in a year's time, and we have the EU-Africa Summit, I think these are opportune moments that we need to grasp in terms of change, transformational change with impact. We hear a lot of what the processes are in terms of youth. We need to create around 1 million jobs in Africa per month. This is a big challenge. Around gender mainstreaming, including in agriculture, around digital transformation, but we need to start showing impact. And I will give you a bit of indications of what we are trying to do in a practical terms so that we can be more granular, be more practical of what the vision is. Evidently to be accompanied by the financial framework that the institutions will agree, hopefully sooner rather than later. First of all, the issue of research is going to be critical. We can't have a transformed agri-food system without strong ag research for development. And our trust will prioritize more processes like agroecology. We also showed that agroecology and our initiatives, which is the DESIRA program in the last 3 years, is to be more sensitive to issues around water, soil, carbon sequestration, and sensitivity around shocks of climate change. We need to build back better by being transformative in terms of a green recovery embedded around agroecology, around conservation agricultural systems, around typologies which are more climate smart. Also, because we know that the continent is going to be impacted even more by climate shocks. We saw what has happened around desert locusts, where evidently we mobilized more than 60 million between humanitarian resources and development finance resources. But this is probably not enough, because we need also to anticipate more action, not only on pests and diseases, but also not only on desert locusts, but issues around the pest, the Petit ruminant. So this is on small ruminants, but also around One Health. What the pandemic has showed is that we need to prioritize more issues around transmission between animals and human health, because today we will have COVID. Hopefully tomorrow we will not have another pandemic. So issues around One Health, around anticipatory action on One Health will become crucial, and this needs to be embedded not only in Horizon Europe, but also in our development portfolio from a research angle. Secondly, priorities around agricultural value chains. Speakers before me spoke about fairness, about inclusiveness, and clearly what COVID showed, it also showed the vulnerabilities and the inequities around value chains. With the more prosperous getting more prosperous, potentially, the weakest part of the value chains get weak. So we need to have tools, including our value chain analysis, and what we are trying to do. And this in close collaboration with countries like Germany, with BMZ, GIZ, but also with partners in the Netherlands, Belgium, is around sustainable cocoa. We launched with Dr. Flashbart a process of a new multi-stakeholder dialogue, because you can't do a transformation process if you don't involve all the parts of the value chain, from the farm to the fork, from the cocoa bean to the chocolate bar. And what we launched on the 22nd of September is a process which starts with Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, but which could also include other countries, to actually tackle issues around deforestation, to tackle also the concept of living wage and living income, and also child labor and a human rights-based approach. This would be accompanied by the processes that our colleagues in DigiJust are doing on due diligence horizontally, and also the process that our colleagues in Digi Environment are doing around deforestation. So horizontal approaches, but with also sectoral underpinnings, because the cocoa value chain is different from the palm oil value chain, which will be different from the coffee value chain or from livestock. I think we have an opportunity, a low-hanging fruit around cocoa, because cocoa is pretty much dominated by a few suppliers. 2-3 countries supply around 2/3 of the cocoa that we import in the European Union, and I think this is an opportunity to zoom in detail in a strong policy dialogue with the countries concerned. You don't solve deforestation, you don't solve child labor if there is no policy dialogue accompanied evidently by the necessary tools, whether technical assistance, which we are mobilizing, but also financial innovative financing. The role of private sector financing becomes key. Official development assistance on its own will not do the magic trick. It has to be accompanied by inclusive financing. And that is what we are trying to do also with IFAD, where we mobilized around 50 million euros in terms of small ticket sizes, where we noticed that traditionally financial institutions don't enter. These are ticket sizes which are well below 1 million, but also where we can look into more fairness, inclusiveness, and support more farmers' organizations. You can't have agri-value chains which have weak parts in terms of support to the cooperative movement or the farmers' organization. So we will continue building up on the portfolio, including the portfolio of farmers' organizations across the different regional economic communities, but also Pan-African. Last but not least, evidently, the topic of nutrition, which I'm sure Lawrence Haddad will elaborate more. We have a national, an annual tracking process within the European Union. So a commitment which we met already earlier on, 2019 rather than 2020, of a 3.5 billion portfolio in terms of nutrition sensitive agriculture, but also a priority to reduce stunting. Now there, the target until 2025 is to reduce stunting figures by 7 million. We are still distant from that, but hopefully with the prioritization of the new MFF, where there will also be a strong trust on human development, we can continue focusing on nutrition. Evidently, the risk of COVID is that the vulnerable components of the population, especially children, small children, we're speaking about kids in the bracket of 0 to 2, but also childbearing mothers, are amongst the most hit by COVID, and evidently these target populations need to be accompanied in the transition in the post-COVID recovery. So 3 take-home messages. First of all, the leadership role in a Team Europe spirit, where it's not the Commission or Germany or France, but it is the additionality of all the interventions in a coordinated way, accompanied by a transformation process in close collaboration with the partner countries in Africa and within the African Union. Secondly, using the events of 2021 to show what's working and what's not working, why it's not working, and how to reconvert that issue which is not working in the run-up to the African Summit, to the EU-Africa Summit, in the run-up to the UN Food System Summit, where we as Commission Services want to team up with the member states to really have impact in the various processes, from the scientific committee to the action tracks to the champions group, and also to really be involved in the food dialogues. Dr. Flachsbach mentioned the issue of the coherence between the common agricultural policy and development policy. Why not having platforms at our EU27 to discuss the coherence of our policies between the CAP and our external policies? And last but not least, evidently, hopefully to have a more multilateral role in our transformation process, where with the likes of the FAO, of WFP, of IFAD, in the UN fora, we can really show impact on the ground by teaming up with the like-minded, but also using trade as a part of a solution and not part of the barriers. If we can push a trade agenda in Africa, which can increase substantially intra-regional trade, which remains at a very low level of less than 20%, we can really be transformative by dismantling barriers around sanitary and phytosanitary, around issues which are of a non-technical barrier, and this would be clearly a top priority when we operationalize the African Continental Free Trade Area. This would be clearly amongst the top priorities for the next MFF. Over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Mizzi, to give us this very holistic overview. It is also very well, interesting and good to see that the Commission is not thinking in silos, but really that you have this collaboration across DGs, internal, external policies, and so on this very important topic. So I think this is very, very good to see. Thanks a lot. You already mentioned the Food System Summit that will take place next year and the importance of multilateralism on this issue. which is the perfect transition to our next speaker, Dr. Stephanie Galatova, who works in the Knowledge and Policy team of the UN Food Systems Summit Secretariat. Dr. Galatova.
Yes, good morning, everybody, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to participate in this panel. So I'm actually going to be talking about the importance of Africa's small and medium agro-enterprise sector in building resilient and sustainable food systems. But I'd like to frame it in the objectives and expected outcomes of the Food Systems Summit, because SMEs are obviously very relevant to achieving the objectives and the expected outcomes. So I have a short presentation. The first part is actually on the Food Systems Summit. I won't spend too long on that because previous speakers have already talked about it and very similar issues. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Hopefully it will work. So as I said, previous speakers have already talked about the fact that today's world food systems are failing, and that has also been even more critically exposed by COVID-19. And we're familiar with the various statistics of how many people are hungry, malnutrition being the #1 factor contributing to reduced life expectancy. And this is malnutrition as well as overnutrition, and a staggering number of people worldwide are overweight or obese. Food systems also contribute a large part of greenhouse emissions, and then agriculture is also responsible for a very large percentage of biodiversity loss. So clearly food systems are not working in the way that we would like them to. So the Food Systems Summit has an ambitious vision to deliver on this agenda. And I'd just like to say in the words of the UN Secretary General, who said that transforming food systems is crucial for delivering all the sustainable development goals. And there are two words that mark this summit and what it aims to do. One, that it's envisaged that it will be a people's summit and a solutions summit. And the People's Summit means that it's not just going to be about high-level policymakers and governments, but recognizing the fact that everybody has a role to play in achieving more sustainability in our food systems. So here we're talking about civil society, NGOs, research and the scientific community, and also, very importantly, the private sector. And this is where I want to touch on the role of SMEs, because as I mentioned, SMEs do play a critical role in building resilient and sustainable food systems, but their role is often not fully recognized. To use the words from Thomas Reardon, who's done a lot of research on SMEs in developing continents, he calls them the hidden middle, because a lot of people are not aware of just how important they are in terms of sustaining the entire food value chain. So the summit has 5 main objectives: ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all, shifting to sustainable consumption patterns, boosting nature-positive production at sufficient scale, advancing equitable livelihoods and value distribution. And this goes very much in line with what previous speakers have said about the need to include women, young people, and vulnerable segments of the population. And finally, building resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stresses. And of course, COVID is upon us. So what can we do to mitigate the effects of COVID? This is just a schematic figure of the various components in the Food Systems Summit. So we have a scientific group, we have a champions network, a UN task force, And we have the 5 action tracks or the objectives that I just mentioned earlier, together with levers of change for gender, for finance, and for innovation. I'd like to focus a little bit on the on the 4th box, the Food Systems Summit Dialogue. We see that this is going to be a critical part of rolling out the objectives and engagement with people across the world. And these dialogues will take place in different fora and different formats. So there are going to be global dialogues, but very importantly, there are going to be member state dialogues. So basically dialogues at the country level. Some of these will be formal dialogues organized by governments, but they will also include independent dialogues of stakeholders who want to get together and bring their voice to the table. And this is particularly then again important for the SMEs who sometimes don't receive the full recognition of the role that they're playing. So one of the things that the summit really wants to do is to ensure that agri-food SMEs are included in these Food System Summit dialogues and that their voice is heard. So the summit outcomes, well, we certainly hope that the summit itself next year, which takes place next year, is not the end of the conversation and the actions. So we anticipate at least the 4 following outcomes: a dramatically elevated public discourse about the importance of food systems, leading to the achievement of the SDGs. Significant action and commitment to action by all stakeholders. A high-level set of principles established through the process that will guide member states and other stakeholders. And this is a series of events, consultations and dialogues taking place basically from now until the summit in October 2021. And then following the summit, a system of follow-up and review that is expected to drive new actions and results and allow for sharing of experiences, lessons and knowledge. So now we come on to the SME sector. So what is the role for SMEs, particularly in relation to the African continent? Well, SMEs obviously play a key role in food security, particularly for the poorer segments of the population. But importantly, they have other roles. They are really a part of the fabric of Africa's agri-food system. And they have a broader role in terms of livelihoods and socio-economic development, creating jobs and mitigating rural-urban migration. They can also catalyze investments into rural areas. And again, talking about inclusivity, these small companies very often engage women, youth, and marginalized groups. These are some interesting facts, statistics from the AGRA 2019 report. So as you see, up to 96% of marketed farm output is supplied through domestic markets, with wholesale logistics and processing SMEs representing the biggest contributors in creating markets for farmers. So clearly SMEs have a critical role to play in increasing incomes for smallholder farmers by allowing them market access. Roughly 40% of the gross value of the agri-food value chain is in the midstream segments. So the midstream segments is exactly where the SMEs are operating. So again, it shows that they have a very important role to play in ensuring the efficiency and the sustainability of the value chain. Rural-urban supply chains have increased in volume by 800% in the past 3 decades. That's quite astonishing. And then finally, a total of 95% of small-scale farmers supply to the processing sector directly to SME processors or via SME wholesalers. So again, it shows that really the majority of small-scale farmers are heavily dependent on SMEs as market outlets. There are, however, a number of constraining factors for African SMEs, and I'm sure most of you are already familiar with these, so I'm just going to touch upon them briefly. The first one is institutional support. There's often a lack of institutional support for SMEs because they often fall between policy mandates of different ministries, including agriculture, trade, industry, and commerce, and therefore they may not receive appropriate attention by any of them. In some cases, policies and regulations overlap or conflict due to the lack of coordination between ministries. Or in some cases, policies tailored for the manufacturing sector fail to properly apply to the agribusiness sector, given its specificities in terms of product perishability, unreliable procurement, weather, climate change, etc. An additional point on the institutional support is that governments and also donors and development agencies tend to focus particularly on the more disadvantaged groups, such as smallholder farmers. And as a result, public policies as well as development initiatives often target mostly the production side of agri-food value chains at the farmers level. And so this lack of attention means that very often SMEs don't get access to the capacity development and other benefits that is focused on farmers. Access to finance, that's a really big one. Very often finance is very difficult to access for these small companies. Sometimes because they haven't got a robust business plan, but very often because banks and financial institutions make requirements which the SMEs simply cannot fill in terms of collateral. And where finance is available, very often it's extremely expensive. I know in Ghana, I think the interest rate is over 20%. So if you look at how that's possible for a small company to be able to afford the cost of financing, it simply is not possible. Training and skills development is another issue, and this also goes down to the training in terms of tertiary education, universities, which often is quite academic, and it doesn't respond to the needs of enterprises and entrepreneurs who want to develop their own businesses. Poor infrastructure in many areas, particularly linking rural areas with urban areas. Also, there's the issue of utilities, particularly electricity and other sources of energy, which are often unreliable or very expensive. Trade restrictions, this has already been talked about, and there's a lot of hope that the African Continental Trade Agreement will actually lift some of those restrictions or reduce them. Digitalization and innovations, often small companies don't have access to the latest digital technology and other innovative practices, and particularly in relation to COVID, e-commerce and e-agriculture has really taken off in the last year. But unfortunately, SMEs often don't benefit from that. It's probably the larger companies and the supermarkets who are more in the forefront of that and can take advantage. And finally, advocacy and representation. So a lot of small companies are not linked, or maybe only informally linked, into a network of other companies and businesses. And this does affect their ability to advocate, to have a united voice, to put up their recommendations and proposals to governments and other stakeholders. So with stronger representation and various alliances and networks and agribusiness platforms, that would actually really help to get their voice heard. And this is something that the summit is trying to work towards. A few support measures for African SMEs, what works and what doesn't. So evidence shows that the most successful programs take into consideration challenges across the entire value chain. So many national level initiatives, particularly those catalyzed by the public sector, focus on disbursement of finance and credit. But evidence shows that although applying for financial support can be cumbersome and finance products are not always tailored to the most pressing needs of SMEs, they do also need a range of other support services. For example, capacity building to comply with food safety regulations, business skills, and others. Energy, as I've mentioned, is a big one. Lack of reliable and affordable energy, particularly electricity, which of course is essential for the various SME functions such as processing, storage, cold chain, etc. I've already talked about easing of trade restrictions, so yes, obviously the impact so far has been limited, and this is also due to the effect of COVID-19, but there's great hope that that is going to take off in the future. There are some good examples of collective action and representation. For example, the Uganda Agribusiness Alliance is extremely active and has really managed to advocate for the agribusiness sector in the country. And they have very strong links right up to the head of government. And then finally, digitalization and innovation. Again, more needs to be invested in ensuring that companies adopt modern practices and techniques, and perhaps some kind of peer learning or mentoring between large companies who have access to those technologies and their smaller brothers and sisters. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this insight into the summit. So I think we know now more about what expects us next year. Thanks a lot. Now, I would like to ask Mr. Lawrence Haddad, who is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, to give us his perspective and insights on the topic from his long-standing experience in the field of food security. Mr. Haddad.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, panelists and honourable members. It's great to be here. The topic I was given was, how does trade policy affect the availability and affordability of safe and nutritious foods? And I come at this as the chair of Action Track 1 that Stephanie was describing earlier. It's the action track that is focusing on how do we ensure access to safe, nutritious food for all. And the action track chairs, they're all looking for game-changing solutions, things that really will change the rules of the game. Marginal changes are good, discrete changes are even better. And trade policy is, if there ever was a high-level game changer, trade policy is it. It literally is a change in the rules of the game. And when we come to trade, we think of exports and imports, and governments can influence what is exported and they can influence what is imported. Now, why should those who care about nutritious food be interested in trade, and why should those who care about trade be interested in nutritious food? I hope in the next 5 minutes to talk a little bit about that. So when governments are thinking about, what goods and services do I export, classical trade theory says, you figure out what you have a comparative advantage in, and that's what you focus on exporting to the rest of the world. But within this set of comparative advantage goods, governments have choices. And if there are healthy goods as well as unhealthy goods, healthy foods as well as unhealthy foods within this set of comparative advantage goods, I think that government should think about focusing on the healthy foods. Why is that? Well, first of all, the demand for healthy foods is growing, and it's growing really rapidly, especially amongst youth, especially in middle and high income countries. It's good economics to focus on healthy food. That is a massive growth area. A second reason that it's good to focus on exporting healthy foods is that even though the food is for export, the gearing up for the export of this food can generate positive spillovers for domestic production and consumption. So higher productivity, for example, in vegetables for export should have a positive spillover to higher productivity for vegetables for domestic consumption. Better roads for export should lead to better roads for domestic consumption. Better cold chain technologies, better standards, and better capacity to meet those standards all have the potential for positive spillovers for the production and consumption of domestic consumption of these healthy foods. How can governments do this? They can do this through a variety of instruments that are not trade related, actually, through R&D policy, agricultural R&D. Most of it is targeted towards staple foods. We'd like to see a greater share of it targeted towards fruits, vegetables, dairy, eggs, pulses, fish, these kinds of foods as well. Tax breaks can double down on the comparative advantage for smallholder, small and medium-sized enterprises in these nutritious food sectors. And again, infrastructure, the design of infrastructure should be done with a mind to generate positive spillovers. Now, no matter which products are chosen for export to focus for the export focus, does it matter how these comparative advantage products are produced, whether they are healthy foods or not healthy foods? And yes, it does matter, because increasingly consumers worldwide, especially again young consumers, want to know that the exported products they are purchasing are sourced ethically and fairly. So this creates a massive opportunity for workforce nutrition programs, for example, promoting the nutrition, breastfeeding spaces, healthy foods in canteens and cafeterias, good nutrition education on site in the workforce. These kinds of programs are really essential to signal that the value chains that are producing foods for exports, or it could be garments for exports, these foods are produced in an ethically and well-sourced way. They are produced in a way that they are shown to care for their workers' well-being. And again, big companies have a big role to play here to support small and medium enterprises in these value chains. So that's exported food. What about influencing which foods are imported? Now, imported foods are the ones that the importing country doesn't have a comparative advantage in, but needs those foods. But again, there are choices. Governments impose tariffs for a whole range of reasons, to maximize revenue, to protect infant and uncompetitive industries. But even within those imperatives, there are choices. So governments could, for example, consider reducing tariffs on imported products that have the potential to improve the health of their populations. Health of their populations is really important for future economic productivity, and it also reduces the burdens on health systems. So governments should consider reducing tariffs on imported products that are good for the health of their population. A couple of examples. In Pakistan, GAIN, my organization, worked with the government of Pakistan to reduce import tariffs on the premixes that are needed to fortify wheat flour. So premixes are the micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals that are added to wheat flour to make it fortified with zinc and iron and critical micronutrients like that are very important for the growth and development of people, for their immune systems, for their cognitive function. But the government of Pakistan had a tariff on that. It was generating very little revenue for the government, but having a massive negative impact on the fortification of wheat for hundreds of millions of people. And so working with the government, we managed to get that import tariff reduced. The downside to that is that it stunts the domestic production of these micronutrient premixes by smallholders and small and medium enterprises in Pakistan. So every action in the trade space has a reaction, and we have to be very mindful of that. A second example is increasing import duties on palm oil. The French government did this a few years ago because palm oil monocultures are harmful to the environment in which they're grown, and also rich in saturated fats for consumption. But again, this has negative consequences for the economies and the small and medium enterprises and the smallholders in the exporting countries. So in conclusion, trade is a potentially very powerful tool for healthy diets, but the direction is not always clear when it comes to health. There are powerful vested interests, and there's a potential for recrimination, obviously, between nations. And I think I want to come back to something that Leonard Mitzi said. It's very important that all of the discussions we have on trade, when it comes to trade and health or trade and environment, are at least evidence-based. We may not end up where the evidence tells us to go, but at least we know when we are deviating from the evidence. Nationally, policymakers, I think, could make a better job of linking their trade policies, or making sure their trade policies are as aligned as possible with the food-based dietary guidelines that governments produce to guide their consumers. Food-based dietary guidelines, most countries have them. It tells their consumers in their countries what to look for when they're buying food and consuming food. But it would be great to see those guidelines also being used as a guide for all kinds of policies that the government produces, including their trade policies. And in the multilateral space, the WTO and WHO are very important, obviously. Multilaterally, it's interesting, the WTO and UNEP, UN's Environmental Program Agency, they signed a formal agreement in 2018 between them, a partnership agreement reflecting the fact that trade and environment are closely linked. But the WTO and WHO do not have a formal agreement, despite the fact that trade is such a big driver of health via food consumption and other pathways, including obviously COVID-19 kinds of pathways. So it seems strange to me that WTO and WHO don't have a partnership, and it seems to me they should think about exploring a formal agreement. So finally, Anna, my final comment is one I've made before. Trade may be a blunt instrument for changing health and nutrition, but it's a potentially powerful one, and we have a responsibility to make it as sharp as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haddad. I think it was great to remind us about how everything is interconnected and how important it is to look at the issues from a holistic point of view and not just pick one element, because they have effects on everything else. Thanks a lot. We also have with us today Rodrigo de la Puerta, who is the director of the Food and Agriculture Organization Liaison Office to the European Union and Belgium. Mr. de la Puerta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anne, and good morning to everyone, partners, colleagues. First, I wanted to thank Ms. Marlene Modler, dear Marlene, for inviting the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO. Ms. Modler is a dedicated member of the European Parliamentary Alliance Against Hunger and Malnutrition. I wanted to say that, first of all, an alliance that is fundamental these days in moving discussions on key policy issues in Europe. FAO serves as the secretariat of this key alliance. I think today's discussion is extremely timely. Many of the panelists already indicated the key events that are going to happen in the next months and years to come. But I wanted to start with a key fact that we cannot forget, is that food security is not a given for nearly 700 million people. And the pandemic, as all of you know, is making things worse. FAO participates in the global network on food crisis with the European Union, with our Nobel Peace Prize laureate colleagues, the World Food Programme, about UNICEF, with UNICEF and many other partners. And we all estimate that hunger will grow significantly. To give you a number mentioned by Mr. Flashback already, but important to mention again and again, FAO projects that up to 132 million people will join the total number of undernourished in 2020. It is also clear that the food systems were already extremely fragile before COVID, and that they were facing so many challenges. You name them, how to feed a growing population, particularly in Africa. adverse climate shocks, increasing scarcity of natural resources, food loss, and waste. And in many places, the crisis is making more difficult for less developed countries to access safe and nutritious food at affordable prices, an issue addressed in depth by Mr. Haddad with some good examples and proposals on how to address this key issue. I think also what we have all realized in Europe, in Africa, in the whole world, is that keeping our food supply chains alive is crucial throughout this trying period. The crisis is contributing to reverse the positive achievements of the last decade on food security and poverty reduction, and has exacerbated the so many long-lasting structural challenges of the food system. As many as you know, agriculture and rural livelihoods, also mentioned by some panelists, employ almost 40% of the population in low and middle income countries, and food systems directly employs over 1.5 billion people all over the world. 4.5 billion people depend one way or the other on this food system. So more than the whole global population of the world. Africa, as underlined by Ms. Modler, has a great potential, has a growing and increasing young population, and agricultural value chains and food systems have to be, can be, but they should be a source of decent job for millions. 60% of the youth, women, and poor likely living in rural areas and likely to have a job in this area. I think this is a key point. We cannot forget when we discuss the EU's recovery programs, when we discuss the farm to fork strategy and its global dimensions. FAO and the UN agencies are there, I think, to assist in making clear this global dimension of the farm to fork strategy as an honest and neutral brokers to implement the strategy not only in Europe, but with Africa, and not only for Africa, as mentioned also by Ms. Flash Barth. Looking at all these challenges mentioned, the complexity of them, I also believe, like Leonard said, that we need more than ever multilateralism, collective action, in order to address the fragility, the existing and even worse now, fragility of the agri-food systems. Having this in mind, I wanted to brief you on a task force on Africa food security amid crisis that was launched by FAO and the African Union in April. The innovative approach of this task force is not only ministers for agriculture there, but also ministers for trade, a word that has been mentioned, I think, by all panelists, and also ministers of budget. And I think it's the first time these three ministers met together, representing all African Union countries, and the European Union is a permanent observer of the task force. I think this key task force can fit nicely into the EU-Africa Summit in 2021, and also into the UN Food System Summit, nicely illustrated by Stephanie. I also wanted to tackle the issue of, many of you mentioned it, but I think it's important to insist of international trade and inter-regional trade that is fundamental in Africa, as it has very low proportions of inter-regional trade. This is crucial with these globalized food systems, more than ever, a growing dependence throughout the whole farm to fork cycle. Trade and related policies are key in the effort of countries to make also the agricultural sector more sustainable, more green, and more productive. More than anything, I think that that COVID is emphasizing that we need to address the food system in the three dimensions of sustainability: economic, social, and environmental. And I think we have not mentioned much Africa's biodiversity, which needs to be protected also at all costs. We also need to build on the power of research, innovation, digitalization, but innovation not only in technologies, innovation in policy, in governance, in partnerships to address the enormous challenges that we're facing. A lot of our work of FAO and the other UN agencies with the European Union, with the EU member states, and I'm pleased to see Germany here in line with the Team Europe approach, with Africa, with so many other actors, with parliamentarians, with non-state actors, goes in this direction. Innovative approaches and partnerships to look into also anticipatory approaches mentioned by some panelists with solutions that work, solutions that can be scaled up to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Only 10 years left, as mentioned by Ms. Flachbart. And I think it's time not to make business as usual, as Leonard mentioned. We need to really think out of the box, and FAO with other UN agencies is ready to play its part. Thank you very much. I was brief, but to allow also some discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much, Mr. De La Puerta. I would like now to ask the audience to type in their questions in the chat. So please mention your name, your organization, and also to whom you want to address the question. To start, I would like to ask the first question to our host, Marlene Mortler. So there's a question in the chat. I will slightly rephrase it because it is very long, but thanks a lot to Hilary Berry. So Ms. Mortler, you mentioned in your speech, and also the other speakers also mentioned it again, the importance of women in agriculture in Africa. Can you share with us some ideas on what the EU can do to step up its support for them?
So here I am. I think the basis for all people is to become saturated. That is why the high contribution of young girls and women to agriculture, to rural areas, and the economy as a whole is undisputed. My wish is that they need, therefore, better access to information, to credit, and to land. I think the right of women to own land must finally better recognize them as full owners of land. The United Nations, we know, has declared 2019 the decade of family farming. For me, this is a fit occasion now.
Thank you very much. Please don't, to the audience, please don't be shy. Please send us your questions. In the meantime, I will ask some that I have also written down. So I would like to ask Dr. Maria Flachbart. So with the current COVID pandemic and its aftermath, which has also devastating effects on the world economy, including on the European economy, I would like to ask you if you see a risk that the political focus will be much more on the internal recovery, and that there will be maybe less solidarity from EU member states to support the African continent.
Yes, of course, there is a risk not only in Europe but also in other countries on the northern globe. There is a significant risk reducing the benefits given to multilateral organizations like the UN organizations. We as Germany, we try to work against this risk. We have 4 billion euros activated to give it to our work of the BMZ for the years 2020 and 2021. Because we see the huge need in our partner countries to overcome this COVID-19 pandemic in the health sector, but also in the nutrition sector, as we have spoken about this last hour, but also in the economic sector. So we just try to help, and I think we have to afford this, because we only can overcome the virus worldwide, or we won't. And so it's in our responsibility. We have just to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then I would like to ask Mrs. Ngoma. So a lot of these initiatives are government-driven. Can you maybe give us some insight of what parliaments can do, and maybe even single parliamentarians to drive the EU-Africa strategy, but also the SDGs forward?
Oui, je vous remercie pour la question, mais comme l'a rappelé M. de la Puerta, il y a déjà bien évidemment l'Alliance parlementaire pour la sécurité alimentaire et la nutrition au niveau des différentes régions, et pour ce qui concerne la sous-région Afrique centrale, nous nous sommes retrouvés en novembre dernier à Brazzaville pour justement asseoir des stratégies, mais la pandémie de la COVID-19 a quelque peu freiné les intentions qui étaient les nôtres pour mettre en commun les différentes stratégies et trouver des éléments de langage commun, avec bien évidemment le soutien de la FAO. Je l'ai dit tantôt que la plupart des États ont un ministère de l'agriculture. La plupart des États contribuent à hauteur de 5% de leur budget à l'agriculture. Mais comme cela a été évoqué tantôt, les difficultés liées à l'essor économique, à l'environnement des affaires, fait en sorte que l'on soit amené à constater quelques blocages. Si les PME doivent représenter l'élément essentiel pour la diffusion des stratégies idoines, il est tout à fait indiqué qu'un climat sain des affaires soit mis en œuvre, que des moyens soient mis à disposition. En parlant du problème du foncier, parce que l'accès à la terre, c'est une préoccupation émise en ce qui concerne les femmes, ça va de soi que le parlementaire doit donc se battre pour faire en sorte que dans le cadre des missions qui sont les siennes, notamment dans le cadre de l'adoption des textes de loi ou alors de la proposition des textes de loi, que cette mission régalienne soit mise en exergue pour aider à l'adoption des lois. Maintenant, dans le cas de l'Union européenne, il est dit tantôt que l'Union européenne s'appuie aussi sur les différentes structures régionales africaines. Donc, parler des problèmes africains en passant par l'Union africaine, et que si des stratégies doivent être mises en œuvre dans les différents États, il faut bien que de coopération en coopération, d'organisme à organisme, ce parallélisme soit respecté. Mais il n'en demeure pas moins que d'État direct en État, il y a l'aide aux politiques publiques. Il y a de la relation particulière entre les différents États et que l'on doit plutôt être emmené à avoir des stratégies idoines. Donc, pour revenir à la terre, il y a déjà la préoccupation dans la plupart de nos États africains de l'accaparement des terres, où l'on voit des parties immenses prises pour, bien évidemment, par des gros partenaires par rapport à l'exploitation qu'ils veulent en faire. Donc, les petits agriculteurs sont quelque peu lésés en la matière. Il y a aussi que, dans le cas du transfert technologique, parce que je crois que c'est M. Haddad qui l'a dit, on ne doit pas s'asseoir aux bonnes intentions. Ça fait plusieurs années que l'on dit que l'on doit atteindre le transfert de compétences technologiques et les innovations, que l'on doit aussi pouvoir faire ce transfert au niveau de l'Afrique. D'accord, on le fait, mais quel est le taux d'application de cette mesure qui, plusieurs années fait partie des échanges et des débats. Si on veut arriver au plein emploi, il faut que l'on donne aussi qu'on lui donne la possibilité de transformer convenablement sa matière première sur place. Or, la matière première est exploitée, transférée pour transformation et revenue en Afrique en produit fini où ça coûte excessivement cher. On parle de résilience, oui, la capacité de se relever d'un choc, fut-il environnemental ou sanitaire. Aider à la mise en œuvre des plateaux sanitaires, des plateaux techniques sanitaires adaptés. Oui, on ne va pas tout le temps dire qu'il faut soutenir, mais il faut accompagner, que celui qui en a plus puisse aider celui qui en a moins, et que dans les stratégies qui vont être mises en œuvre, on parle plus de donnant-donnant, mais que l'on sache que dans cela, il ne s'agit pas de tendre la main, mais plutôt de partager ce que l'autre a de plus pour permettre au continent africain aussi de se développer convenablement. Pas dans le cadre sectoriel comme on le voit, parce que c'est très disparate, mais si on veut avancer dans ce cadre-là, et nous l'avons dit tantôt, par exemple, l'autre priorité pour les négociateurs, c'est se concentrer sur la santé et l'allègement de la dette dans le sillage de la COVID-19. On voit tout ce que cela fait pour conséquence. Les produits finis qui proviennent de la zone européenne. Avec cette pandémie, il n'y en a pratiquement plus. Le coton, il y en a plein en Afrique. Donc, si on pouvait être emmené à faire en sorte que les masques, par exemple, soient conçus en Afrique parce qu'on est parmi les premiers producteurs de coton, ce serait une très bonne chose, ce qui allégerait bien évidemment les coûts de mise en œuvre, parce que le commerce, comme l'a dit Madame Stéphanie tout à l'heure, je crois, c'est important de rendre autonomes aussi les petits commerces en mettant à leur disposition des moyens, mais en impliquant certes les différents ministères. Et je crois que cette rencontre des trois ministères qui sont l'agriculture, le commerce et le budget pour asseoir un certain nombre de stratégies est tout à fait idoine, et que nous nous attellerons tous à suivre bien évidemment les conclusions. Raison pour laquelle, dans le cas des accords de partenariat, les parlementaires doivent être lourdement ou fortement associés pour qu'on ne les interpelle tout simplement en aval, mais que nous soyons en amont des initiatives, tout comme nous sommes en train de le faire dans le cadre de l'ASLECA, où on met en place une structure bien évidemment parlementaire, certes francophone, mais qui sera bien évidemment élargie aussi à d'autres. Voici la réponse que je pouvais donner.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. We now have another speaker who unfortunately dropped out temporarily, but who's now back. So I would like to just quickly give the floor to Kas Kuvadia, who gives us the point of view from the business perspective. He represents the business unity of South Africa. Mr. Kuvadia, I would like to ask you to be very brief because we are already a bit...
Yes, I will. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm really sorry, but I've had serious network problems, and then I drove away from home and just got somewhere else, and I'm able to link up there. So very quickly, I think that I had identified 5 themes. One is the importance of the EU-South Africa partnership, and we believe that a number of dynamics makes our partnership a natural one. These include geographic proximity, the history we have with each other, and that both in South Africa and Africa, the EU is a significant trade partner. The 6th summit between the EU and EU exemplifies the importance of this partnership. Then on Africa, Africa has about 600 million hectares of uncultivated arable land, which is 60% of global total. This means that there's substantial investment potential. There's substantial investment potential for agriculture and for food processing. And I think that that's something that the EU needs to bear in mind. We are, as the continent, beginning to leverage off developments in technology, 4IR and other business propellers, and can leapfrog into these. There's significant mobile usage on the continent, although internet usage is still low, but we can leverage off the mobile usage, and that's an advantage. Africa has a very young population, and we must ensure that this is a potential instead of a negative. It has the fastest growing middle class in the world. We obviously have problems of governance in pockets of the continent, as well as wars in some areas, but development and ongoing governance progress in the majority of the continent can push back on these negatives. We have had pre-COVID 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world, although we also have 36 of the world's most fragile economies, fragile countries. So there are both opportunities and challenges on the continent, and we believe a partnership with the EU will enable us to build on those opportunities. Organized business, we believe that organized business can play a role to move from a business as usual approach to a sustainable business approach, to take a longer term approach to business so that we conduct our business in a way that also grows and develops societies and communities around us. And that certainly in South Africa is beginning to happen. Business needs to contribute to the growth and development of communities and work in the national interest. And in South Africa, as an example, we are involved in a just transition from coal to renewable energy, and to do it in a way that does not create a negative impact on communities that have been dependent on coal. Also, as far as food security goes, we believe that businesses can use science and data to determine causes of food security and understanding these, making small-scale farmers part of business models, particularly in agriculture, as part of sustainable business models, sourcing from local suppliers, having awareness programs on food insecurity, and partnerships to develop social business models so that businesses for profit can also have partnerships with social businesses that can actually work and develop communities. The critical elements of the partnership between EU and Africa have been identified, but in particularly the area of growth and jobs, Busa has been doing a lot of work in South Africa, and we believe that enabling private sector-led growth in a responsible and sustainable way, creating jobs in that way, taking into account the needs of communities around the businesses, we believe that's probably the most sustainable way to go, and it creates a win-win situation. So let me stop there. I'm really sorry about the internet, the connectivity problems, but I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kuvadia. With a view to the time, I would like now to give the floor to our final speaker, who is giving the closing speech, Mr. Jeremy Lisuba, who's a member of parliament for the Republic of Congo. Mr. Lisuba, I would like to ask you to be a bit brief because yeah, we reached the end of the conference. Thanks a lot.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much, Honorable Mortler, to all the distinguished speakers who came before me, and to SME Office for organizing this event and for the enriching conversation. Now, I was asked to reflect on two questions. The first one is, what type of PPP can help farmers and SMEs in Congo remain competitive during the green transition? Now, of course, there are many kinds of PPP. In Congo, we have PPPs relative to logistics, to transport, to energy, but also with regards to education. We have a forthcoming digital jobs school, which is being created as a PPP. We also have a number of conservation projects. I think the EU is quite involved in them that involve different kinds of PPP arrangements. But I think I was more stricken by the idea of remaining competitive and a green transition when speaking of farmers and SMEs in Congo. Just to give you a quick briefing, because a lot of people confuse my Congo, Congo-Brazzaville, for the DRC, Congo-Kinshasa. So Congo-Brazzaville is a relatively small country. It's about 342,000 square kilometers, a population of 4 to 5 million people, 60% urbanized, 40% rural. Now, of the roughly 10 million hectares of arable lands that are available in the country, between 2 and 10%, I know it's a wide margin, are actually being utilized. That's a hugely underutilized potential for such a country that has actually wonderful precipitation, and other favorable conditions. Predominantly made up of small farmers, 0.5 to 1.5 hectares on average, and only about 200 modern farms throughout the country. So this is a very familiar story. We have a sector that's greatly underdeveloped in many ways, and most of the actors are actors that have limited access to energy, to storage, to transport infrastructure, limited access to finances, tools, and inputs. And ultimately, there is very little competitiveness to speak of. And moreover, I feel that rather than speaking in this context of a green transition, in the Congolese context, but I believe in many African countries, a similar situation would be, it would be more appropriate to speak of a green evolution. Because the SMEs, for instance, to go back to what Dr. Galatova said, the SMEs that she mentions, in reality are not SMEs in the strictest sense of the word. They tend to be informal actors who are organizing by their own means, but who do not have that officially recognized status, which may afford them a bank account, which may afford them insurance and other things that you would expect SMEs in a traditional sense to have. So, and the reason why I go to lengths to explain all of this is because ultimately the objectives of the farm to fork strategy and the green transition that the EU is aiming for are precisely the objectives that African agricultural sectors are also seeking. And so when we talk about the kinds of initiatives, the kinds of PPPs that can help in this sense to achieve a degree of competitiveness, to achieve a green evolution, then I think you will find that those actions proposed in the farm to fork strategy are precisely the kinds of actions that we too in Africa need to undertake. So of course, this involves a number of farm level actions to support sustainable resource management, appropriate and informed use of inputs, advisory service, etc. But it also implies promoting circularity wherever possible, improving capabilities, and this is something that's very pertinent relative to partnerships with the European Union, improving capabilities for things like geomapping, biological and geological testing, research, tracking market information. I think Mr. Mizi said that research is key, and that's absolutely true. I also believe that promoting the emergence, this has been said by several of our speakers, the emergence of diverse processing capabilities, the capabilities, and especially by my elder, Honorable Ngoma, processing, enabling, or Africans having the ability to transform their raw materials. And I take this opportunity to actually say that in thinking about all this, we also need to look beyond food. There is an enormous potential for bio-based industries to be developed in Africa. And I think this presents a number of opportunities, not only to improve food security by raising rural incomes and improving and enabling these rural investments, but also in terms of creating jobs and furthering this rural investment, rural development. So I think that's an untapped potential that actually should be discussed more broadly in terms of these conversations, I believe. And last but not least, again, something that's been said by some of our speakers, implementing national plans and fully implementing the Continental Free Trade Area. I had the opportunity of working on the national strategy for Congo, and I can tell you that the national strategy for Congo involves trade facilitation, of course. It also involves business climate improvement, but it also involves capabilities to better enforce quality standards, which I think are very important if Africa is to trade with the EU. So I believe that all these actions would help farmers and can, in my view, be more effective if they're carried out in the context of PPPs. Because I am a parliamentarian, but I'm also a farmer. I have a very small farm in Congo. So I see this from both sides, from the side of the policymaker, but from the practitioner, which may be a rare breed. But it's, there is a sense in which partnerships with governments have a role, but I think there needs to be increased focus on partnerships, the horizontal cooperation at the business level, at the farmer level, because this is more organic, this is more specific, and it avoids some of the, let's say, challenges that working with the public sector actually involves. This is not to say that the public sector should not be involved, but it's simply to say that more emphasis should be placed on partnerships and facilitating partnerships directly between private actors. I think that's also something important that needs to be looked at. So very quickly, the second question I was asked is, what role should food businesses in Europe play to support sustainable farming in Africa? And I would say very simply, seek out real partnerships, and again, directly with the actors on the ground. And evolve through this transition, because again, since our objectives are actually very similar in terms of the agricultural sectors we'd like to see, there's a lot that can be shared in terms of knowledge, in terms of experience, in terms of tools. The investment in production and processing capabilities is essential, because Africa has this potential, because European firms are also looking for new markets. And so there is synergy to be found here. And this is not just for European or world markets, but this is also for domestic and African markets, which, as we all know, are growing rapidly. And finally, the last point is that I also believe that we shouldn't just be looking at food businesses, but at many other actors, such as universities and research institutions, the tourism industries, and of course, the many different bio-based industries that are in existence and growing every day, to build these partnerships that I believe can yield both mutual benefits and the sustainable development outcomes we seek. So I will simply conclude by saying that as policymakers, I think our role is to catalyze, facilitate, frame, and support these partnerships, enacting the appropriate regulation and reducing exposures to risk. And risk, whether it be perceived or real, but is a real problem that we at the bilateral, the EU, Africa governments and African Union levels can help mitigate. So again, I think we have a lot of tools at our disposals. Many tools have been discussed today. I think we need to, use them better. I think this is something that is very true in African countries and with governments who have all these tools at their disposal, but often fall short in terms of implementation. So I think there's more to do there. But I think that the opportunity is there, and they can enable us to leverage and achieve our respective aspirations. So let's be clear on what they are. Let us speak to each other, not about each other, and let's move forward together. I think that's what I can say. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. I think that was perfect to round this debate off. So it's all about partnership and talking to each other. So I hope that we can continue this dialogue in a different format, in a similar format. Thanks a lot. So this brings us to the end of the debate. I would like to thank all speakers for taking the time to be with us today and to share the insights. And also I would like to thank the audience for your attention and for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't take now all of them. If you have any questions left, please send them to the organizers and they will extend them to the speakers. So with this, I wish you a great day.